So welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers at VMware. And today I'm joined by Adam Ryan from Calligo. Welcome, Adam. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Guy. Thanks very much.
Do you want to just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what's your role, and what Calligo does?
Yeah, sure. Adam Ryan, Chief Data Officer at Calligo. Calligo is a data company founded around the turn of 2011, 2012, and really has followed a sort of evolution of what we see happening in our customers that started as a cloud provider with a particular niche of, I suppose, really from the VMware perspective, looking at sort of sovereign and sort of residential cloud in the Channel Islands, and it expanded globally. Then we added privacy and ethics to the mix, really sort of seeing the emergence of growing regulation globally and where that would then lead from a data perspective. And then more recently, in the last sort of like 3-4 years, added the data analytics, machine learning, and data science capabilities to the organisation that really mean that when you look at the three together, we can very much be the partner to grow with our customers through any sort of step of that journey that they're on in that digital transformation that we're going to cover today.
Yeah. And okay, so let's just start. Where's Calligo based? You mentioned Channel Islands, UK as well, right?
No, absolutely. So founded in the Channel Islands, historical reasons for that, and really then expanded. I know the Channel Islands can sometimes raise certain eyebrows for certain reasons.
I'm just smiling.
It has its advantages for people that live and work out there. I'm based north of London, so I don't experience any of those myself. But it wasn't the rationale behind the foundation of the company from there. The CEO Julian has lived out there for some time, and really, if you go back in history, it was because in previous companies we were taking technologies into the Channel Islands that really meant, in particular VMware, that they needed on presence on the island if they were going to take that jump with us as their technology partner. So basically a cloud within the Channel Islands in Jersey and Guernsey. Then that really expanded with our clients. We're in the UK, we're in Ireland, in North America and Canada, and indeed Luxembourg.
When I think about data and data transformation, there's not too many providers who are kind of dealing with the in-depth data science view and data analytics that you guys are providing. How did that come about? I mean, what was the main driver of that? Was it particular verticals asking for this or particular customer requirements?
I think I'd love to say yes, but I'll stick to the truth. I think at the end of the day, we've always been good at spotting the sort of trends of where the industry is going to go next. So you could see from the outset of when the company was founded to provide cloud that at the time there was a rush to the cloud, but not too much concern about the data, which sounds a bit strange, but it was more about moving infrastructures to the cloud quickly because that was seen as the sort of panacea for everything. There was a belief that would actually change and that the value and the impact of data would grow. And that really led to the creation of the cloud platform. So that it was very much based around the need for data residency, and you knew where the data was and you could control it from end to end. So we've always been a data first organization, but really, as you've sort of seen the emergence of the need to look at data from a data privacy and ethics perspective, that's where we started to work with clients in much more granular detail about how they operate as an organization. We set up the privacy practice in 2017, and I have to say, it's having been a technologist all my career, it was the one area that was when you work with clients, they open the kimono so much quicker to tell you exactly what was going on. When you're in a technology space, there's a bit of fencing going on. You've got to obviously establish trust, and over a period of time, you get to that trusted advisor space. I'm not saying it was any easier in privacy, but you're having different discussions about why they've got the data they've got, how are they using it, how does the organization operate? And that then naturally lends itself to, once you've understood all of that, well, why wouldn't you be the partner to actually help them with their next level of data analytics and how they really look to leverage the huge amounts of data that they're sitting on, but do that in a manner that's actually within the regulations, and also as we start to look at data science and AI, is performed ethically, because we've always had that message, but now you're starting to see worldwide regulations and everything coming, much like with data privacy, that mean that you have to consider that first and foremost. So that really is what led to us really building out the data practice, and particularly around the machine learning, where once you've reached a certain level of being able to perform data analytics in a really sort of mature way, the next logical step is, okay, how do we then look at the next step of how we can leverage machine learning in an industrialized manner. Obviously, there's lots of uses of machine learning that are built into applications now, which is great, and organizations of all levels can sort of benefit from that being built into the visualization layer. You see it in Power BI, in Tableau. But if you're talking about real industrial scale machine learning, that still does need the team of data scientists behind it that actually understand the business problem. And I think that's the key thing. Our data science team, quite a lot of the time, the lady that actually heads that up, Tessa Jones, prefers to refer to them as business scientists, because they actually understand what the business is trying to achieve, and they avoid that conflict of terminology that can be the death knell of a lot of machine learning of explorations.
Yeah, once you get into sort of code books and different languages and different learning patterns, and it's a very, very complicated space.
It's not something to dabble in. You can. I think 85% of AI and machine learning projects fail. And I think that's a fundamental reason for it, because firstly, I think you need to have data scientists that have actually deployed at scale before. Have worked in different environments, so that it's not a one-trick pony. That if this did, we're going to try and do what we did before, but it's a totally different use case. And it's everyone else they need to actually understand the data architecture. So data scientists don't work in isolation. They need a team behind them. So it's a hell of an investment if you're going to actually do that and do it properly.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, how did you go about growing that practice? Because those resources are extremely hard to get hold of. What's your secret?
Tessa's very persuasive, both to clients. I mean, she's hugely experienced and hugely skilled and inspirational. So for a start, everybody wants to work in that type of environment. Put everything else aside. We all want, the most sort of fulfilling day ahead of us, and to sort of build on that and grow. So she's got a fantastic team around her, and that's the sort of culture that they promote both internally, but equally with the clients. So, the clients come out of it having had a really sort of enriching experience. It's definitely not a dictatorial type of approach, because the client knows their business better than anyone's going to. Our job's to sort of present the hypothesis of what could be done had you thought of this, to bring them into the world of data science. But you're right, finding those skills, and particularly those types of skills. You can search the market for data science skills, but whether they've got those business skills, that's really difficult. As regarding the scale, touched on that sort of slightly earlier, that we built it. All of our services we build out in an as a service manner. Be it cloud, privacy, with the data science, that we know that you don't necessarily need a data scientist for every day of the week. You really want to drop in the right skills at the right time in the right part of the project life cycle. So again, the team is scaled to have those different levels of skills, and then equally different disciplines. So again, we've got the data engineering part. A lot of the time is spent in that part, that once it's done and we can continue to maintain it, you don't necessarily need a big engineering team. You certainly need them at key points in the project.
And you mentioned data privacy, and I think this is, obviously privacy has become much more important and focal for people since GDPR came out. And I think interestingly now there's more of a challenge around understanding your data from a monetization perspective, particularly for what you want to do in future development, and understanding the classification of data, particularly industrial data. There seems to be a kind of emerging area where you really look at Internet of Things and stuff like that, especially what I deal with sovereign scope, understanding what that data is that they're consuming, whether that data can be exposed, whether that exposes any privacy aspects to personal privacy or something that is of a higher classification level. Do you find that customers kind of generally understand this, or is this all quite new? Like, we're okay with GDPR, but this sort of thing is, oh, we've got to think about this differently.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's almost one of the biggest bugbears. That the reason for that is most of that stuff's really dull. Being totally honest about it. So if you want to look at it, you've got the sexy stuff of machine learning and data science. I mean, who really wants to talk about data governance? I mean, there's just no fun there. The sad fact is, though, that at the end of the day, that's probably another big reason why 85% of those projects fail, because it's something that is necessary. I think the biggest problem with it is because it's so cross department and cross disciplined, no one really holds a budget for it. So
that's a good point.
There's loads of great products out there that we've got some great partners that we work in this space that do all the heavy lifting of the data discovery, the classification. God forbid data owners. I mean, that's the one that always who wants to own the data. So there's some great tools out there, but the issue is that when you start talking about either the project or the tool sets, obviously that builds a budget, and no one seems to hold that singularly. Data privacy, you can find someone in the organization that's responsible, so there's an initiative there. Data security, that's always going to get a budget because everyone's fearful of what's going to happen. But data governance is actually, Tessa's got a great catchphrase I'm gonna nick. It's the ugly stepchild that never gets invited to the party. It's actually the underpinnings of what all this stuff's going to rely on. So hopefully people will start to realize that and start to build that into their other, more attractive sort of initiatives, and realize that that's the foundations that all this stuff runs on.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have a good handle on your data first before you can even start thinking about how you want to use that data.
I think there is. I agree. I think there is some light at the end of the tunnel, possibly on this. That I do think with the growing trend towards the demand for ESG, and there is European regulations, in the pipeline, very very near pipeline, around the need for data governance. That maybe some of the lessons learned that continue to be learned in data privacy can be transferable into those areas. And certainly the huge amount of interest in ESG does give an element for people to understand, because at the end of the day, most organizations don't get rid of any data at any scale. And that's the thing that's driving all the need for the data centers, all the need for the power that's in the public eye, and companies are having to report on that. So the end-to-end sort of supply chain of how we get our digital transformation is going to become so much more important, that maybe that will surface up the need to what is consuming all this stuff in the cloud.
I mean, a lot of it's just completely redundant data that's never going to be accessed and needs to be cleaned up. And like you say, there is a social responsibility to kind of make sure that data is how should I put it, trimmed on a regular basis. But then obviously there's compliance and other reasons why that may not be viable to be removed. But you mentioned a good point, like ESG and ethics around data management and data use. How have you seen this kind of evolve? I mean, from my perspective, I kind of think about it as, everyone looks at kind of Bitcoin and GPU and those cryptocurrencies and huge volumes of energy that's required to do all of these transactions and data mining. Does that fold over into the kind of application space as well, in that it's just another application consuming more GPU, more processing power?
Absolutely, and it's one of the areas that the data science team have been working on to come up with those calculations for what is the environmental cost of the model you're deploying. Because everybody wants, it's the classic conundrum that everyone wants everything faster. But at the end of the day, there's a reason, for the car analogy, that we don't all drive around in Ferraris because, the cost, but they're not suitable for most of the time because you can't reach that speed and you can't maintain it for long. So having models that are more environmentally sustainable I do think is something that's going to come more and more into the mix. That first, there are things that absolutely need the highest performance, but does everything need that? And you just, in the last month, you look at all the noise around ChatGPT. I mean, the stuff like that, again, what's the cost of the next, I'm not going to call it a fad, but the next wave that actually ignites the imagination of everybody, and everyone starts to leverage it. That's huge. But even consumer side of the market, when does anyone delete any of their pictures that are stored in the cloud? It just this stuff, the wastage. Maybe we need something more along the lines that people have got their heads around recycling their rubbish. We'll extend that to your digital footprint, because it's colossal. Streaming platforms for every film, and it's something that people are going to have to get a handle on. And the irony is that you start to see initiatives that are looking at sorting out the mess of the first industrial revolution, but it's actually pushing a lot of workloads into the one that we haven't even begun to understand the true end-to-end cost. And typical, how many times does humankind sort of repeat the same mistake in a slightly different way? And we do need to think about this, because the cloud, I think, actually with Panorama, it's so Panorama back 2 weeks ago, in 2030 in Ireland, 30% of their power will be consumed by the cloud.
Wow. Yeah, that's
and so again, it comes to the rather disingenuous type of offsetting that goes on, that you've got all the data centers in the Nevada desert and they're offsetting somewhere in like Norway, but it doesn't help the people actually. You sort of see the water table and the state of that in Nevada, and it's just like, well, that's really not going to help them. It looks right on a website and in a ESG report, but at the end of the day, it's actually causing a real time, here and now displacement issue in that region. So, I do think that's the next wave, that maybe that'll get people excited enough to look at that sort of stuff, that then that will come into data governance to classify the data, understand what we do need, what we don't need. And then start to be a bit more responsible around what we leave behind us.
It's a good kind of ethical discussion, like how do you bring down the physical kind of energy constraint with PUEs and things like that, and then how do you ensure your data is only the data that you actually need to run your business, rather than just all of the data. And it is you're right.
It's quite funny. I was speaking about this yesterday. It's quite a funny one for VMware, because I remember we developed, this is a few companies ago, we developed quite a few services in conjunction with VMware, and we won an award for one of the services that looked at the environmental impact that could be, the benefits that could be achieved by virtualization. I think it was stunning. The difference it made to data centers was, albeit it was a massive enabler, because the physical constraints of what were in place before would have meant you couldn't have done what we did. And now when you sort of step back and look at it, that was the precursor to cloud and whole optimization, virtualization of services, and getting rid of wastage. But it drove the capacities up of what you could deliver per rack, and obviously that then lends itself to data center density of power. So it is funny, we couldn't possibly have got to where we got to without what was a great technology at the time and made a massive difference. But poacher turned gamekeeper. There's something we all need to look at again now, because we've got to a place we could never got to before.
Yeah. So tell me about maybe some customer examples where Calligo obviously engages at the cloud infrastructure level, and as you said, right, the data and the specialization in the data transformation technologies and solutions you have. What's a kind of an example of the type of customer that you would take through that end-to-end journey? What does that look like from a time frame perspective? What are some of the challenges that you've seen? I mean, I'm trying to understand it so other providers who are watching this can sort of understand how they can perhaps start getting into this space, upselling, because it's a great pull through. I mean, if you've got the cloud for a customer, essentially you've got their data and good data gravity then within your data centers. It's a nice pull through then to bring that modernization solution into play.
No, absolutely, and it doesn't come without its challenges. So the sort of easiest one to get out there is if we've got, say, a cloud customer that's also taking our data privacy services. Now we're always at great pains to make sure that when we set up the data privacy part of the business, that it was ring fenced, because at the end of the day, you know, we provide data protection officer as a service, and one of the requirements of a data protection officer is to demonstrate that they don't have any conflicts of interest. So hang on a second, you've got the cloud, so it's in here.
Okay, yeah, I see.
So absolutely, it's totally ring fenced that operationally they have nothing to do with each other, and they're able to deliver their service lines independently. So you know, sometimes that can actually mean that certain requirements will come out, say, the privacy service line onto us as a cloud provider, that we need to almost become the provider to the data privacy service to make sure that that's actually performed, but whilst maintaining all those firewalls to keep the independence. But no, you're absolutely right. From a perspective of the cloud, I think it's fair to say that, you know, we have a certain type of client within our cloud platform. So as we discussed, it was the sort of data sovereignty and residential requirements that drove the initial platform. But equally, it also came at a time when there was a huge change in technology with the emergence of flash storage, basically changing that performance paradigm that always existed in the cloud, how you balanced out the volume with the performance aspects of storage. So from day one, the platform was always built on 100% cloud storage for production workloads.
Right.
Different tiering of storages for backups and things like that, S3 layers and the like. So it was always good to have a platform that, for clients that had got heavy duty, maybe slightly bespoke workloads, we were able to create virtual data centers that had the resource requirements that they needed without what can come from overspend of trying to cookie cutter set configurations that were available in hyperscalers that didn't necessarily, when you look at the aggregate workload, work out that cost effectively, or indeed from a performance perspective.
Yeah.
So we were able to operate in that space that said, actually, for your particular workloads, that we can actually be more performant, but also more cost effective. Now you start to see those type of approaches being incorporated to some extent in the hyperscalers, and that's fine. There's certain workloads that actually lend themselves better to run in a hyperscaler. There's no issue in that. And that then lends itself to the really having those deep expertise to create that multi/hybrid cloud environment so that you can actually understand which workloads work best or meet the demands of, say, a performance area without actually dragging along the cost, and which one's actually fine. It's a commodity workload. Let's push it there. So certainly you've seen huge uptake in 365 where people maybe used to run their own services like that. It's like, why would you? Yeah. Who needs that pain? Just push it out to these service providers and let them handle it, and they do a great job on that. Whereas if you've got a highly transactional, always available, one of our clients, I'm thinking about, they run a sort of global booking engine for hotels and stuff like that. The performance workload of that and the availability is massive. So the engineering requirements that go around that are significant. So you spend a considerable time working with the client at the outset to understand what their applications look like, and then to make sure that the cloud environment is able to provide that type of service that they otherwise wouldn't get. So I think it's fair to say that we are a hands-on cloud provider that will work with the client to understand what their workloads are, rather than leave them to necessarily just throw it in the cloud and potentially hope for the best.
And is the kind of multi-cloud aspect something that Calligo manages for the client as well, or is that something the client has to do?
No, absolutely, and indeed all the way through the stack. So I suppose in some ways to your question about the end-to-end on the digital transformation. So that might start with cloud, and indeed say a multi-cloud environment with some stuff sitting in Azure or AWS or another hyperscaler, and then the key workloads residing in Cloud Core, our cloud platform. But then as the client starts to evolve into data warehouse, data lakes, data meshes, that then sort of transcends the natural cloud part of the business into the data side, but equally they're going to have landscapes running. Snowflake's a big partner of ours, but other data lakes, obviously anything running in Azure from that aspect. That again, that they're going to want to see, or certainly most of our clients want to see the same type of approach that we can provide in cloud in that data space as well. So we're able then to look after those infrastructure components on behalf of the client, provide obviously the skills from a data visualization, so you're doing that last mile of the data analytics into the client so they can consume their data in the way that they need to, and they can push everything else, including that, out to us so that they can focus on running their business whilst we take care of the data side of it.
So it sounds like I mean, it's the perfect solution really, and this is the multi-cloud approach, which should be the way people do it, which is the right cloud for the application, and making your kind of cloud decisions based on performance, cost, residency, jurisdictional control. And that's another thing. I mean, we talk about data privacy and data classification. I think you're perhaps in a bit more of a unique environment in the Channel Islands where people actually potentially understand jurisdictional control and sovereignty far more than they would do in another country in the EU, perhaps. Do you find that you're educating customers on the difference between residency and jurisdictional control and legal control over the data, or is that something that's kind of...
No, absolutely, because funny enough, when we started the data privacy practice, our initial clients were pretty much all stateside. And I remember having some really in-depth conversations with internal IT departments, and some of the language was fairly industrial around what us Europeans were doing, and didn't we understand how technology works, which was always from the concept of, well, hang on a second, how am I supposed to identify this piece of data and impose the restrictions around, say, GDPR in this instance, all the way through the sort of data life cycle. And that was always at the very outset what we wanted for the data privacy practice. What we didn't want to be was the ministry of no. You can't do this, end of. We've got some awesome clients operating in that space that they're constantly pushing the envelope of sort of application development, autonomous lawnmowers. I mean, who would think that what can happen with data from an autonomous lawnmower perspective? But when you start looking at the data that uses to do what it does, flip it round, and you've got security concerns around when people are on holiday, what their perimeter fence looks like, all this type of stuff that isn't necessarily the first and foremost concern of the application developer, who just needs to turn something out to do what they need it to do. So we've got the concept that, well, it's not our concept, it was in the late 60s, I think, by Anne Cornucopia in Canada, of data privacy by design and by default, that we'll actually work with the app developers to go through, well, okay, here's the privacy concerns in the code set and the data that you're doing, so that we can actually make sure that the code is developed right first time and deployed right first time. And that it's really fun, because that actually really makes privacy interesting. And as I say, we always wanted it to be that we would be a provider that could provide answers. And I'm not talking about getting around the regulation, I'm talking about working within the boundaries of the regulation, and finding ways that actually things can be developed to be aware of this, that keeps the velocity needed of development, but also, understandably, then actually does protect the rights of the data subjects. And so the company can sort of be rest assured they've done what they need to from their development perspective, but they're actually looking after their clients and their customers in the best way, and can actually demonstrate that to them. So the company reputation is becoming more and more important, especially everything's on the internet. With an internet, as soon as anything happens, it flashes up. So everyone is always at the could be unfortunate enough to have an incident, but it's about how you could demonstrate that you did everything you possibly could to avoid it, and actually you've got the steps in place and the procedures in place to look after your clients, your data subjects, that should something happen, your response is professional and was thought through before the time. So
really important.
and as I say, that goes all the way through to clients where deploying machine learning for optimization of say price optimization and things like this, that the considerations around what data sets you're using and the data minimalization, and then indeed extending through to the ethics of predefined sort of decision making and things like this, that you have to be aware that there's restrictions to, you can't just do what you necessarily might want to do, and there's these boundaries in place for sound ethical reasons. It's all that space that actually is probably the most interesting to operate. You get some great conversations going with clients as clients try to leverage digital transformation. But I can't remember the exact analogy, but it's about crashing at speed. At the end of the day, you all crash at the same speed. The end result's the same. What we want to try and do is make sure that doesn't happen. And false velocity is a dangerous place to be.
Yeah. It's a really interesting space. I mean, from VMware perspective, obviously we've brought out our kind of app modernization portfolio, which builds on the infrastructure to look at like Tanzu portfolio, for example. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. And we've been talking about things like Tanzu application catalog, the CI/CD pipeline, and providing the applications, the secure production applications that developers should be using when their code goes into production. And it's really about trying to, I guess, in some ways, lock down the Wild West of development and put it into, this is what we support, this is what we've vetted as secure, etc. But then there's another Wild West, a layer below, which is the data. And many application developers, particularly if you're looking at verticalized industries, say, for example, transport and logistics, the data classification is somewhat available for those things, but certainly data privacy, and that needs a kind of a second set of eyes to look at it, because there isn't really any de facto standards around industrialized data at the moment. Not that I've seen in any case, but maybe there is, but certainly not enough. So it's a level of consultation and knowledge and expertise that you've got to kind of provide back to the customer in that respect.
No, absolutely. In fact, you touch on an area that's sometimes raises huge concern, where you see technological advancement for one reason, but it's built in isolation. And there's some great technologies coming out from a lot of the major platforms, world's leading CRM system, data lake and data warehouse solutions out there to enable faster and more efficient data sharing. So some of these data warehouses now that you can choose to share some of your data, selected parts of your data, say to your supply chain. So and it does it in a way that means you don't need to push it out to another data lake, another data warehouse, and create another data set that's got another footprint. So firstly, the data is more actionable, it's more up to date, but it hasn't created a second data set you've got to manage, or indeed the impact of that. Yeah. However, that scares me witless that no one's thinking about the data privacy. And as I say, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool techie, so I know what we're like. We do things, and it's like, that was fantastic what we just did. And we look at the tech, but who's there to be the custodian and the guardian? Say, hey, hang on a second, slow down. Have we considered that actually you could be sharing up data to somebody that you've got no data processing agreement or data sharing agreement in place, and your privacy team might not know anything about it? At least in some ways, in some of the sort of more traditional ways, there might be a project. Someone might know something about it. It might get surfaced up. But with this turnkey type approach that can just get turned on in the background and just enabled in seconds, Spider-Man, isn't it? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
That is the stuff where is that classic technological advancement has gone brilliantly ahead, but does it get missed? Is it slipped under the radar? So there's no end of privacy considerations for that type of thing. So understanding that, because it is great tech for all the reasons we've said about ESG, that can, and one of the biggest drivers for ESG I can see being supply chain management, because
totally.
I think pretty much everybody probably that sees this is getting requests either from their clients or from their customers. What are you doing about this? Because we need to report on, and there's this whole new industry of needing downward and upward reporting, and then this can enable that to happen. So that's fantastic. But the discipline needed around it is significant.
Yeah, and I think there are solutions that hyperscalers are starting to. I think Gartner's tracking industrialized cloud on the upward part of the hype cycle, and there is challenges with that and taking something off the shelf without really understanding what it's doing and how it's doing it and how it's manipulating your data. I mean, it's like Office 365 was an easy conversion, and virtually everyone's moved to Office 365. So unless you're in a kind of really high secure environment that requires you to have complete segregation, then fair enough. But the standards that are going to be coming out of these industrialized clouds are still evolving. And this is where I think in a lot of respects, you're not going to get the support and the partnership from a hyperscaler for your industrialized cloud solution that you would get from someone like yourselves, who the customer is going to be able to pick up the phone to, have a proper engagement with, have proper support and architecture and planning. And that's a really unique value proposition that I think our cloud providers bring to to customers who require those solutions. And with everything evolving, it is going to be easier for a smaller partner to react to change than it is from a huge hyperscaler to react to change when they've got potentially thousands or millions of deployments of this stuff. So it provides a lot of advantages in that respect as well. How do you see the industry kind of and market moving forward for Calligo in the data transformation space?
It's hugely exciting time. I think if there's one thing that we've been working on for quite some time that we can see being a big driver, is the ESG space. And much like what we've developed previously, if we go back far enough to cloud, the whole concept of working with clients to let them understand what cloud is, how it affects their business and how they can transform. We did exactly the same in data privacy, that there was a whole education needed. Then there was a baseline of where they are, where they need to be. Got exactly the same approach in ESG, in that there's probably two clear differentiators in the market at the moment. There's organizations that have started on it, typically your tier ones that have got their nice reports on their website. And then there's the other organizations that are coming into the regulatory scope as it starts to expand and are starting to think we need to do something about this, both from a regulation perspective, but investment companies now, if you've got no ESG plan, you're not going to get the investment. It's a key criteria for M&A activity. So, it's those sort of actions are going to gear behavior. And in that space, we've developed exactly the same approach, as I say, we did to privacy, that we're going to work with organizations to firstly perform like a gap analysis to make them understand, okay, these are the things that you need to do. So they're probably the organizations that haven't started on that journey and don't have that nice report that's sitting on the website. But just the same, the ones that have got the reports, they're months out of date and they're not actionable. So as they start to appoint their anyone that's in charge of their chief sustainability officer, they're going to come in and go, okay, I know where we were maybe 12 months ago because it took 6 months to create a report and so on and so forth. What do I do about it? I mean, PDFs aren't exactly the most consumable piece of data to actually start producing actionable events off of. So underneath that, there's a huge data layer, a complete data mess of everything that fed into that report. How do I get that in one place that I can actually start to consolidate into a data visualization, into a sort of graphical representation? that I can then start to leverage things like machine learning to do genuine what-if scenarios, that if we did this. And then as you start to look at how that feeds through the supply chain, again, that data extension gets longer and longer. Fortunately, with things like embedded analytics, you've got the capabilities there to actually extend your data out to your clients or indeed your customers. But having a practice that can actually understand the subject matter, but has the pedigree actually in the data engineering and data science space is going to be invaluable. Because at the moment, it's a little bit of window dressing really going on. That there's really nice reports out there that are a fascinating read, but they're not anything you can actually do anything with.
Yeah.
So a lot of these initiatives are going to need, as I say, actionable data, and the sources that it comes from are a massive data engineering challenge. So that's something that we see being a real big driver for data projects going forward, and then that's why we've given a real focus to that. But I do think also, unfortunately, with the events going on out in Ukraine, that people will also start to look at, because it's started to focus the mind on the complete end-to-end supply chain of all this stuff. People looking at why are we not independent from a power perspective?
Yeah,
it's not going to be long before people start considering their data in the same way, because it's the next logical extension of it that being where we are now and with what's changed, some of the decisions look incredibly stupid and short-sighted. To the point you could have almost seen sovereign nations outsourcing their defence to larger countries and stuff like that.
Yeah, it has happened.
Then when you look at what's happening with power, maybe those type of things were even on the table. But now that's going to force people to say, hang on a second, we do need to have a level of independence here that comes down to data sovereignty. So I do think decisions will be made in a much more considered manner to understand where the data is, what are the risks associated with it, even in a sort of geopolitical sense, because it's just shown us the last 2 years, unfortunately, with what's going on, that the world that we thought was in place about 18 months ago can change very quickly. And we didn't ever think, I think we'd ever be here, but the decision will be made against a different risk framework, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully enterprises are more kind of on the ball than our politicians are, and I think that's probably a done deal. So just on the sustainability thing, I think this is interesting because you're right. Customers now, their supply chain, they want visibility of their supply chain, and obviously their forward customers want visibility of the ESG stance and strategy that their suppliers have. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of kind of websites saying 20, 30, 100% renewable energy, la la la.
Lot of greenwashing going on, the same thing.
Yeah, there is a lot of greenwashing going on, and there always will be. It started first in the energy markets, and now it's filtering into everything. Have you, from a data perspective, I think, and actually you mentioned earlier when these data solutions have adapters that can share data between different parties, not only is there privacy challenges with that, but also there's also sustainability challenges with that. Are you sharing data that is really necessary to be shared? What is actually being exchanged? What overhead is that implying on your compute layer, on your network layer, et cetera, et cetera? So are we saying then that the ESG needs to also come down to almost like a metadata level associated with the data itself for exchange?
No, absolutely. I mean, again, we touched on it earlier that some of the most irritating in some ways part about this space is the way that things are developed in isolation, as if there's no repercussions for what we do in one area to somewhere else. The whole ESG drive could in itself, be a self-fulfilling prophecy of just generating more and more data that actually to report on it has actually cost you more than what you were in the first place. Absolutely. That need, I think we started on this subject of that need for data classification. What are you going to need to share? Fortunately, some of the technologies are in place from some of the major providers to enable you're not going to be doing data duplication to share this information. And it really then plays into that space of it's a phrase I personally hate, of the monetization of data, because you need to be really specific around that. That it's sort of lauded as an aspiration, which I understand, but let's be clear on what that is. That absolutely you could share up some of this information to your supply chain, and that is of value, because they can make they can take actions based on what you're able to share with. And I know one major retailer that's been hugely successful on this, of actually going from being a sort of cost center into a profit center by sharing that out to all of their supply chain. So there's a win-win on that. The information they're sharing actually is really ethical and environmentally sound, and it's going to help their supply chain to actually be able to change their behaviours, because they're going to start imposing their own restrictions on future contracts. That sort of says, okay, we're here, and we know that potentially, let's just say it's a delivery partner. How many of your vehicles are electric? Well, we need you to get to this point by this date, and they can work in partnership on that, to make sure that actually helps them, because obviously the transparency of what the true cost of their product is to get to the client is understood, but they're working in partnership to drive that down. So it is an area that is incredibly complex from a data perspective, but it's really interesting if you've got the heritage on putting together multiple data sources, and as we've said, across the other disciplines of privacy, ethics, and indeed the cloud architecture side, they're all going to come into play.
So yeah, I mean, there's various standards evolving on this, and actually it takes me back 20 years to telco, and when I was doing next generation OSS and data contracts that you would exchange between data subscribers. And I mean, there is now GaiaX and various forms of industrialized versions of GaiaX, which are kind of aiming to do a very, very similar thing in terms of data exchange, to optimize supply chain, and also to let's say monetize data.
Yeah, you can use it. It's just I've this similar sort of issue with digital transformation. Has been around for years, and it's like one of these. It's used that much. It's like, well, what do you really mean when you say that?
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like customers are kind of doing their own thing at the moment. Each one sort of fairly specific in that, and hopefully in the nearer future we'll have some sort of standardization in place around data exchange.
Yeah, and likewise, a lot we've seen with a lot of the regulations, they from country to country they can vary, so those nuances need to be understood as well. So sometimes you're going to, back to the data sovereignty and sort of residency, you might sometimes find if you've gone into an area you didn't know anything about from that perspective, that might bring along challenges that you didn't foresee. It is a developing space, and it's difficult to keep on top of, because the rate of change in either ethics, privacy, environmental, the whole ESG space, it carries along a gravity to the data and how you're using it. So they're quite divorced still at the moment.
Yeah, and legislation as well. I mean, things like Setnum Cloud, for example, in France, that's imposing some fairly stringent rules about who can engage and how they can engage. Again, all based around the kind of sovereignty of France by itself, not let alone Luxembourg, Belgium, Spain, Germany. They've all got their own things going on, so it makes it even harder to think about that.
No French jokes. I've got French family. That's often a thing.
Oh yeah, same with my family, funny enough. Adam, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you today about the data services that Calligo is providing. And where can customers or partners go to find out more about the specializations that you guys do?
No, absolutely. Websites obviously a great first place to start, or reach out to us, any of us personally on LinkedIn or via the contacts on the website. Always happy to have sort of really interesting discussions across this whole landscape. So we've got some great people in the company. Set up some meetings and see what clients want to do.
Excellent. Adam, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
And you guys.
Cheers.
Take care.